This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Well, thanks for coming in, Esteban. I know you traveled far to get here. Tell me about this. What would draw you to a painting that's in this condition?
The story is quite complex, but I'll try to summarize it. So my family actually immigrated from Cuba in the 1960s, so they escaped the communist revolution there. And it was a situation where, they just had to leave with the clothing on their backs. So it wasn't something where you can now collect all your family things, your family history, and leave. So it was pick up your stuff and go. My grandparents never, ever spoke about the past.
Really?
Yeah, in a typical situation, your grandparents would say, oh, my father said this, or they spoke about things, their grandparents, their fathers, things like that. My grandparents never.
So your family tree just kind of stopped with them and you had no idea of your history going further back?
One day, about 12 years ago, I speak to my dad's mom, so my paternal grandmother, and I just, say, hey, abuela is what we call them, a grandmother. I say, abuela, who was your, great-grandfather? And she tells me, kind of just very casually, she goes, in Spanish, but she tells me, my great-grandfather was a Frenchman of the high. She went like that with her finger, she goes, of the high. And, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of doubted it. I didn't know if it was something that somebody told her to feel, to make her feel good.
Well, family lore, it changes over generations and it takes on a life of its own.
Exactly, so I just didn't know what to think. So I started to dig in and started to look for the documents and stuff like that. And eventually, the long story short, people start to call you, all family members start to know you as the genealogy guy in the family historian. Right. So I get a document and it was true. It says that my great-grandmother's last name was Vido. It was a French last name and they were in Cuba. It was a family that had like coffee plantations in Cuba and they would ship to France, ship to parts of Europe. I tend to go back and forth from Paris often. And one time, my grandmother said she wanted to go with me, so I took her to Paris with me.
Wow.
And while we were there, just randomly, because I had searched this family's last name many times, this time I just go kind of like on Google Images, and as I'm going, I see an image of a face that I recognize because I had seen it in an old picture, so like an actual old photograph. But this time,
like family photo or something? Yeah,
it was like one of these black and white Victorian photos that another family member had shared. But I'm like, this is a painting. It's actually something I've never seen. I know the face, but I've never seen this image of it. I contact the person who's selling the portrait, and I tell him, hey, it was only for local pickup, but I say, hey, do you mind shipping this to Paris? He says, sure, we'll ship it to Paris. So I come home from Paris with this big portrait as my souvenir, and about a month later, I'm back in Miami where I live, and the same person, he's kind of like an art broker. He says, hey, I have a portrait of his wife, and I say, okay, I purchase it, we ship it to Miami, and then about a month later, he says, hey, I have another one, and by that point, I say, you must have a source to all these portraits. Right. It wasn't just like a garage sale or something that you found and you're just trying to sell it. He goes, yes, I actually found a lady who was the heiress of all these portraits. He told me that he walked into the room of this lady who was the owner, and lo and behold, he opens a door, and in a room were about 70 portraits stacked, lined up like this.
It's your whole family sitting there waiting for you.
As somebody who loves history, as somebody who is trying to piece back together, our family history, you kind of get to know these characters. Like you start to build the family tree back together, and I knew all their names. I knew who they were, what they did, but I had never seen their faces.
Yeah, well, it's one thing to see them on a genealogy tree or to see them in a history book, but to see them, it really connects you with them, and it allows you to, like you said, meet them, know them, and feel them. Yeah. Well, as interesting as that story is, this painting is telling us a story. I mean, if you look at it, there are, we have some tape, we have one type of canvas, another over here. So there's like at least 4 rounds of repair work that's happened to this painting. Obviously, it's been poorly treated, but it's been cared for in that somebody has tried to fix it multiple times. Unfortunately, all of these things are now impediments to going forward, but we can take care of that. That's not the end of the world. But I'm curious to see what's on the front. So let's go ahead and flip it. So I'm going to deputize you as a conservator assistant, and if you want to hand me those boards. So these are just acid-free mat boards, and we're going to slide them in and really just trying to give the canvas some support so when we do go to flip it, it doesn't just crumble and kind of fall through this strainer, because this canvas is just being held together by a hope and a prayer, I think. All right, you want to slide that one in? All right, and last one. So if you want to hand me these boards, we're gonna, we'll slide one under. All right, now, moment of truth. Let's hope I, all right. Wow. This is going to be a project, Esteban. I won't lie to you. It's going to be fun. Yep, but it's going to be a lot of work. Yeah, I mean, the canvas is just completely torn away in multiple spots, massive losses. Oh, I do see a signature right here. Oh, and torn through, but we'll be able to save that. That'll be really important. This painting needs just about everything we can do, but you're really lucky in that his face is almost completely free of major damage. There's a hole here, but again, we can fix that. So who is this guy?
His name is Joseph Edmond Vidot du Dognon, and he was the count at the time. And you can see that mustache that he has is very typical of that time of the Napoleon III's Imperial Guard. So he was part of the Imperial Guard. He was married already at that time, so he has a ring there. So yeah, he is actually one of our cousins, a cousin to me, but the direct line of counts of the family.
That's so cool. It's so cool that you can figure out by his facial hair, like the timeline.
A lot of research. Oh, and also the earrings. So the Imperial Guard, the men would wear double earrings. So
very
that
fashionable.
Was a really telling tale. He was part of the Napoleon III's Imperial Guard. This would be about 1860s, this portrait. They would just be charged with guarding the emperor, his palace, his family, things like that.
Wow, that is very cool.
My biggest part of the project is I've taken all those stories that my grandparents have told me and I've written a book. So I've been keeping a manuscript. I'm not done with it, but that's one thing that I do want to give to the next generation, is that so they have that kind of link between that history and now where the current world where they're living.
Well, hopefully we can assist in the next journey of these paintings and make sure that they're there for the future and do our small part.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
Just seeing the state, it just told me if I don't do it now, we could lose it. Started to do some research and see, who I could entrust with my family's history, with preserving it. And when I found Julian, I said, after watching some of the videos, I said, hey, this is a guy that I can trust for this. It's nice to tell the story, to be able to share. Maybe also for other people who might be in a similar situation, who may be separated from their family's history for whatever reason. And, maybe if my story motivate them to talk to their grandparents, open a conversation, that's something that I think would be nice. And through Julian, I think it's a story that can be told. I understand it's definitely a challenge. I saw it, I said, this is going to be, something dramatic, something tough to do, but I've seen what Julian's been able to do, so I have complete faith in him that it'll be something that he can kind of take on.
One of the coolest things about Esteban's project, aside from all of the amazing research and photographs and stories he's collected, is the fact that he's doing this for his family, the future generations. He's taking who was and preserving their stories for who will be. And while there are plenty of places to build a family tree, Esteban's project is richer than that. It's multimedia, essays, videos, photographs of these paintings. And in order to share it properly, he needs a website that's as powerful as his story, and that's Squarespace. Now, we all know that Squarespace is the best place to design and build a website for your business, but what if you want to build something else? Well, it starts with one of their thousands of mobile-friendly, beautifully designed templates, and then using their design intelligence software, you can simply drag and drop anything you want anywhere you want it. No coding necessary. And this means that you can focus on telling your story, just like Esteban, creating a multimedia experience complete with photos, videos, and anything else you can imagine. The tools are in your hands. And while Esteban has overcome hurdles telling his family's story, he may run into some speed bumps building a website. And that's okay because Squarespace has him covered with online tutorials and a robust forum filled with people just like him asking the questions that he's going to ask. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. I have worked on many projects, paintings that are important to people, paintings of people that are important to people, but this painting from Esteban is really unique. The fact that he was able to find his family tree and travel to France to rescue these paintings of his relatives makes this project a little bit more special. But it's also going to be a pretty big task. It's pretty clear that this painting is on its last leg, and if intervention isn't taken now, it may not survive another generation. And that would be a horrible loss for Esteban and his family. So I take the weight of responsibility seriously here, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that this painting lasts for the future. After separating the painting from the strainer support, and yes, I'm keeping every little bit that flies off, I can lift off that support and start removing those pieces of acid-free mat board that I put in just to stabilize the piece. I'm careful here to make sure that nothing is caught, because if it is and it tears the painting further, well, I know it doesn't seem like the painting couldn't get any worse, but it could, and I'd like to avoid that. There were more pieces of canvas folded underneath that I need to save, because I'm going to use all of those when I go and start working on the structure. Because this canvas is really brittle, I can't use a vacuum, so I'm just using a brush to remove all of this particulate that's accumulated on the back. And I'll have to do this multiple times because I need all of this stuff gone to have a smooth and flat surface. But for now, just getting this first layer of gunk off is a really big deal. And then I can start removing all of these little patches. And there are multiple iterations here. Some are canvas, some are paper, some have water-based adhesive, some have contact cement like this one, but they all need to go because they stand in the way of all of the treatments that I'm going to do. Not to mention, they're pretty sloppy and they're not very effective. So using my scalpel and my hands and just kind of peeling them up and then removing all of the adhesive, I can make sure that all of this old work is now removed from the painting and the next steps will be successful. Now there are a bunch of patches here and I have to go through and remove each one. And I mentioned that some of them are water-based, some of them are solvent-based adhesives. I have to take a different approach for each one, which is kind of a pain. But it is what it is, and there's no other way to do it. So I will work methodically through until all of the patches and all of the adhesive are gone. And then I mentioned I had to clean the back off again. Well, yeah, there's more debris. I'll take the painting back to the hot table and I'll start preparing it for treatment to flatten this canvas. It's just too rippled and wavy and distorted right now. The use of a nylon release layer in between the canvas and the blotter paper is critical because I want to make sure that I don't inadvertently glue the canvas down to the blotter paper during this treatment. I'll wrap the entire painting's perimeter with cotton webbing, and then I will begin creating the envelope that will be airtight, which will allow me to exert pressure downwards onto the painting. And this, combined with the addition of moisture and heat, will effectively flatten this painting and get rid of all of these distortions. After bringing the table up to temperature, cooling it, removing the painting, and putting it under weights, I can now remove it from those weights, and we can see that the canvas is nice and flat. But it's still a hot mess. There are a lot of losses, and it's not aligned. So I have more work to do before the next step, which will be the lining process. I'll transfer the painting to the front half of the studio, where I'm going to take some time to align all of this canvas now, before it starts to move as it's out of the weights and under pressure. You can see that it's starting to lift up a little bit. This is not a terrible problem, but the longer I wait to do the next treatment, the harder this step of aligning the piece will be. And I'm just using some acrylic tape here to hold everything in place. Remember, the painting is still covered in grime and old varnish, so the acrylic adhesive, even though it's pH neutral, won't ever actually touch the surface of the painting. And I have to take care to align all of these little puzzle pieces to make sure that they fit and match up, because if I don't get it right now, well, yes, I could reverse all of my work and do it again, but that wouldn't be great for me, or the client, or anybody for that matter. Even the smallest pieces can be salvaged and put back in place. And this means less fill-in for me and less retouching, and more of the original painting gets saved. Now sometimes it can be a little tricky. There are just little pieces with paint on them and I gotta figure out where they go. But having done countless puzzles throughout my life, this feels pretty natural. So I'll work through all of the gaps and make sure that I've got all of the pieces that I saved earlier put into place. I'm not gonna leave anything behind. I'll flip the painting again to get access to the back, and I'll work to remove any slubs or bumps on the back of the canvas before I do the lining process. Something as small as that will transfer to the front of the painting and become a distraction, and so I need to remove all of those. It's slow going, but if I don't do this, well, then when I put the final varnish on, we'll see all of these bumps and it'll be horribly distracting. Again, cleaning off the back, making sure all of the grime and all of those little particles are gone, and then I can transfer the painting to the back and prepare it for the interleafed lining. Now, one thing that I didn't do was cut inlays for those gaps. Well, I have a plan, and we'll see that in just a minute. But for now, I'm applying a thermoplastic adhesive to the back of the painting, and this is both solvent and heat activated. And this is what's going to bond the painting to the interleaf layer, that's a rigid piece of PET film, and the new canvas. Once that adhesive is dry, I can remove all of these little pieces of tape. And it's not that difficult, and you can see everything stays put. That's the function of using that flat spun nylon gossamer, that kind of white sheet that was on the back of the canvas. If I didn't put that there, then removing these pieces of tape would cause the painting to misalign, and it would be a problem. Now, the adhesive penetrates through the canvas, and there's a lot of it stuck on the face, so I'm using a solvent to remove all of that excess adhesive, because it's just going to be in the way for when I clean the painting. Because the painting was so fragile, I didn't want to run the risk of cutting inlays and distorting it any further, so I've decided to try something different. I'm taking high-resolution photographs of the painting with a color card and a scale on the photograph, and then I'll transfer these over to my computer, where I will use them to create shapes where the voids are. By adjusting the contrast and doing some wizardry in the computer, I can get the actual shape of the void. And then I can transfer that to my printer and print it onto a piece of canvas that's been primed and prepared. Now it's at this point I go from digital and future to analog and past. I do not have a laser cutter or a cutting plotter yet, so I'm going to have to cut these out by hand. It doesn't take a lot of time, and you can see they're pretty accurate. Now I've just laid them on the surface, and they're not fully adhered down yet. I'll do that later on, and once they are aligned, they'll become permanently bonded. But before I do the lining, I'm removing all of the excess flat-spun nylon gossamer. And then I'll prepare the PET film, that's that rigid plastic film that's going to make sure that the canvas is stable and rigid, and that those tears and holes don't come back over time as the canvas expands and contracts with humidity changes. Now I've skipped over the entire hot table lining process because, well, you've seen it 1,000 times, and I want to get to the cleaning process, which is a lot more fun. Now, I've made some tests, and there's not a lot of grime on this painting, but there is a discolored varnish. And you can see, just by removing a little bit of that varnish, we get a totally different painting. And this is always really exciting for me. I love working on paintings and cleaning them is one of the most enjoyable parts of the entire process. Getting to see what the painting actually looked like when the artist decided it was complete, getting a view of their mastery, and also getting a look at what the person actually looked like is a real treat, particularly because I may be the first person to see this painting as it was intended, well, since it was painted. This varnish starts to deteriorate almost instantly and yellow within days of being applied to the painting. So truly, I may be seeing the painting as close to the artist has intended than anybody else before, and that's pretty exciting. Sometimes the changes are really subtle, but they make a really big difference. You can see the hand here looks a little bit more lively, and of course the cuff is bright white and not yellow. And same goes for his shirt, which is probably well laundered and not stained and yellowed. Getting that old varnish off reveals that beautiful white, and it makes a huge difference. Now, it's obvious when the areas are bright white, but in other areas, like these blues, well, seeing them really changes how we see the painting. Before, this was almost black and kind of without detail, but now we can see that detail. And even an area like the red, which doesn't change a ton, gets a little bit cooler once that warm yellow varnish is removed. And for me at least, that's pretty exciting. But nothing like cleaning the face. Now, with all of the varnish removed, I can show you the overpainting on his nose. You can see it here, but if it's not visible, we'll go and look at it under blacklight, and I'll trace it. All of these areas that I'm outlining in red are overpainting. This was done to correct the tears and holes, and this all needs to be removed. But what remains underneath, well, that's anybody's guess. Unfortunately for me, not much remains underneath, and that's going to be a challenge when it comes time to retouch. But before I can think about that, I have to prepare the painting for the retouching. I need to fill in all of the losses, because even though I salvaged all of the canvas and worked really hard to make sure that every little piece was fit precisely, there are still gaps. Where the canvas tore, the paint was lost. And I can't retouch on that, there's just nothing there. So by using a chalk-based fill-in, I can eliminate those divots and have a surface to work on. But I don't want them smooth, because the canvas isn't smooth, there's a texture. So I'm using a little bit of tarlatan, which is basically a starched cheesecloth, and I'm adding a little bit of texture here. This is going to help the eye pass over these areas of retouching and allow us to not see them. If I didn't do this, well, the color would be accurate, but as we looked at the painting, we'd see an area that was too smooth, and that would give away that this was a repair. There are multiple areas that need this treatment, fill in and then texturizing, and I'll have to make multiple passes because sometimes the texture isn't perfect and I have to come back and either remove some texture or add some texture. But this isn't terribly complicated, it just takes time. And once all of that fill-in has dried, I'll remove the excess. Unlike the previous person who worked on this painting, I'm not simply going to paint over the original. I'm going to be very conservative and just retouch where the paint is missing. And to do that, I need to remove all of this excess. It's not terribly difficult, just a little cotton swab with a little bit of water, sometimes a little solvent helps, and just, again, time. Going over it, and going over it, and going over it. Now, even though the strainer support here wasn't terribly damaged, there is a piece. I'm going to salvage it. I'm going to use a little bit of wood glue and just bond it back into place. I don't know that anybody will actually ever see this, but I'll see it and I'll know that I skipped it if I don't do this step. And I'm not going to do that. So a little bit of glue, a couple of clamps, and it's just like new. Stretching this painting is relatively simple. The interleafed process makes the painting rigid and it helps me align it. The PET film is cut to the precise size, so I just need to make sure that it's not overlapping, and then it's pretty simple. I'll use some sterilized blued steel tacks, and I'll start in the center of each edge. And even though this painting has been interleafed, I can still add a little bit of tension and take up slack with my pulling pliers. You can see right here, pulling it tightens it just a little bit. I'll add tacks along each edge and then flip and add tacks along the next edge and then flip and do it again and do it again and do it again until the entire canvas is reunited with the support. And then I'll cut off all of the excess canvas. I always line the paintings to something larger and then trim it after it's been stretched because it's so much easier and it gives a really clean result. I'll fold over the edges, I'll trim them off, and then I'll tack them with some smaller, lighter weight tacks that don't need to carry any structural weight. They're here just to clean up all of this excess. Now before I do any retouching, I'm going to apply a fairly thick isolation layer for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to help me see the colors as they will be once the painting is varnished, not all washed out and dry. Two, because it's really thick, it's going to fill in any of those little divots where the fill-in medium, the white stuff, didn't quite make it. And that's going to help smooth out any textural issues. If this were really thin, it wouldn't do that. But being a little bit more viscous, it can help me compensate for really, really small textural issues. And then we retouch. With the retouching complete, I can apply the final varnish, which gives me an ultraviolet protective layer and also allows me to unify the sheen. Right now there are some areas that are shiny and areas that are matte, and it's distracting. But by applying this reversible, archival, synthetic resin layer varnish, I can even all of that out. I prefer to brush on the varnish when I can. I can spray it, of course, when I need to, but I feel like I have more control with the brush. And I use a really big, thick brush because it holds a lot of varnish and it covers a lot of surface area. It's more efficient, and again, it gives me more control. Using a really tiny brush wouldn't be better in this case. In fact, it might be worse. I'll pick up any little fuzzies that fall onto the surface of the painting, and then I'll brush it out, giving a nice texture to the painting, allowing the light to bounce off in a really beautiful manner. And then, well, then we're done. Well, Esteban, thanks for coming back in. Remind me, this was your great.
Yeah, it's like a great cousin of the family. His name was Joseph Edmond Vidot Dudognon.
Now, I know that this was part of a big project of, rebuilding your family tree.
Correct.
But when you saw it, did you think for a minute like, ugh, this might have been a mistake?
You do, because again, it's a big project. It's a lot of portraits, and you have to kind of prioritize. And when I saw this one, I put it on top of a shelf in a closet, and I said, basically, I don't know if ever I'll be able to fix this, because it's just looks very complicated. So I didn't even bother.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did, because it was a fun project. It was a lot of work. I mean, the complexity of getting all of the pieces flat, and then the puzzle of putting them all back together, and then all the missing pieces, and then, it just took a lot of focus and determination to make sure that I could see it through. But I think you're going to be incredibly happy.
Okay, I am looking forward to this. Oh my God, yeah, incredible. Incredible. Even this kind of stuff, I didn't notice before that he seems to have like a sort of mold
birthmark or something.
Yep.
Well, it was because it was overpainted.
Yep.
The whole shape of his nose was different. When they had repaired it, they just changed it completely, and they covered up original paint. So when we were cleaning it, to discover that was really, really important, really special.
And now I can see the artist's name, 1866.
Yep.
Giannoli. It's an incredible job. I thought this one might have been the one that could have done you in, but it seems like you surmounted this challenge.
You and every other client, there seems to be this game of can we best Julian, and I'm sure it'll happen eventually. But when I saw this, I kind of knew what it needed, and I had done projects like this before, but this one did require, there were a lot of missing pieces of canvas, and so I had to take a couple of novel approaches to doing the inlays. And then, of course, there was just a lot of retouching. As I was working on it, I just kept thinking that, what I'm doing here in the studio physically with this painting, putting the pieces back together, Esteban is doing right now with the research. And so there was this kind of this beautiful harmony in that your family tree is coming back together as the pictures are literally coming back together. That kind of a nice thought that carries you through some of the monotony of doing the work sometimes.
No, I appreciate it. It's special. It's special. So yeah, on behalf of my family, we really, really thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And like you said, hopefully, as the family continues to grow and for many generations to come, they'll be able to enjoy him and all of the pieces that you've been finding.
Thank you.
And speaking of which, I think you actually sent me two pieces, right? There was this one and there was another one. It was a woman, right?
It was a woman, right? Yeah. So she's aunt of our family. So she actually that woman is from the generation that escaped France after the revolution.
I see.
That one I like because that one actually has the name written in the back. You can see it says Henriette Petit. And yeah, again, according to my research, Henriette Petit was married to Pierre Vidot Dudognon. So all part of that same kind of trunk family, the Vidot Dudognon family.
So speaking of that, I know you came all the way here from Miami, and I wasn't going to let you leave empty-handed. So you get to take him home if you want. But I also figured maybe you'd want to take her home too.
Oh.
And so here she is.
That's incredible. This one I do remember because she had, it looked like she had pretty much almost like a shotgun blast right, to the middle. She had a
massive hole right in her chest.
It's incredible. I couldn't even tell you where the damage was. No, yeah, this one is beautiful because you could see the ornaments in her, the floral.
Yeah, all that beautiful brushwork here in the creation
incredible.
of that.
Thank you,
yeah, and the lace. I mean, this one was incredibly filthy. This one took multiple passes of cleaning, but. You know, when you first brought this one in, I knew that there was something special underneath. I knew that once we got all that grime off, it would be a really beautiful painting. Now you get to take them both home.
Thank you. That's a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting this. Amazing. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
Honestly, I didn't expect to see it like that. I imagined it with like places where you can tell it was retouched, but honestly, really looking at it, I could not tell you where the damage was. When it's clean, you notice much more. The colors pop out a lot more. You know, the blue that he has in the vest that he's wearing, the details of like the trinkets he's got on his clothing. My dream, let's say, to have like a gallery room. Some people like to build a pool in their house, or maybe like a theater room. Like my dream would be to have like a nice room where people can talk, gather, and have the portraits there. It's very good to see the family history preserved for another generation and many more, hopefully.